If you were asked to pick who was the hero in today's Old Testament story, who would you pick? You know, every story has a hero or a protagonist or a character that the story revolves around. So, in this story of the healing of Naaman, which character would you pick as the main character? It might be Elisha, the prophet, who healed the general Naaman of leprosy. And after all, this story is one in a series of stories about the miracles that Elisha did. And when Naaman came to him to heal his scabrous skin, Elisha told him to go wash in the Jordan River. And when he went and washed, his skin became like the skin of a young boy. So it's one of the miracles of Elisha. So maybe Elisha is the hero of this story. Or maybe the hero of the story is Naaman. Now Naaman was a general in the Aramite army and a close friend of the king of Aram. And his skin became infected with this terrible disease they called leprosy. And despite his status as the top military commander in Aram, he knew that if this became known, he would be shunned, and he would be no longer the commander of the army. So when he heard that the prophet Elisha was able to cure his leprosy, he asked his boss, the king of Aram, for permission to go to Israel and see the prophet Elisha. And the king sent it to Elisha with a letter, despite the fact that the king of Aram and the country of Israel were at war with each other, or at least were enemies of each other. And when Naaman and all his servants and officers and courtiers pulled up to Elisha's house, Elisha didn't even get up out of his chair. He just told one of his servants to go out and tell Naaman to go wash 7 times in the river of Jordan. And Naaman was furious. I expected him to come and make a big scene and wave his arms around me and cure the leprosy right on the spot. And he tells me to go wash in the river of Jordan. Doesn't he know how important I am? He didn't even come out of his house. And what's wrong with the rivers of Arbana and Pharpar in my homeland? Wouldn't they be just as good as the river Jordan? And he stalks off enraged. But his servant comes to him and says, if the prophet asked you to do something difficult, wouldn't you do that? So why not just simply do what he says? So Naaman goes down into the river and washes himself 7 times, and his skin is made clean, and his leprosy is cured. So maybe Naaman is the real hero of the story because he listened to his servant and he became humble enough to learn something. Maybe this is really a story about humility. But I don't think that either Elisha or Naaman is the hero of the story. You know, it seems like we always want to look at the richest or the most powerful or the most important person in the story and make them the hero of the story. But I think the most important characters in this story are the 2 most humble, most ordinary people in the story, the most overlooked characters, the slave girl and the servant of Naaman. You know, when Naaman found out that he had leprosy, he despaired. But his wife told him that his slave girl knew of this prophet Elisha in Israel who could heal his leprosy. And the slave girl spoke up and said, if my Lord only knew the prophet Elisha in Israel, he would heal you. Now, isn't this a turning point in the story? If not for the slave girl, Naaman would have never gotten to Elisha. And the slave girl was putting herself at risk by speaking up, and she did it anyway. So I think she's a hero. And then there's the servant of Naaman, who spoke up when Naaman was so angry at Elisha for not even coming out of his house. And the servant spoke up to Naaman, and he gave him some good advice, some common sense. He said, if he had asked you to do something difficult, wouldn't you have done that? So just try what he says. So Naaman takes his advice and washes in the River Jordan, and it's another turning point in the story. Now the servant was putting himself at risk for suggesting that Naaman do something that he didn't want to do, and saying it when his master was angry. So I think the servant was a hero in the story. It's the servants in the story, the lowest characters, the most ordinary people, who are the heroes. It seems to me that this story is subtly making a point. And the point is, listen to ordinary people. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how important you are, no matter how rich you are, don't let your ego get so big that you can't hear common sense advice. And maybe for us who are ordinary people, it's encouragement for us to speak up, even when it's risky to do so. Now, you know that Congress just passed this massive tax and spending bill, and we were told that it was a big, beautiful bill. But the fact is that it's the biggest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in the history of this country. This bill cuts spending to Medicaid, SNAP, which is food stamps, environmental protection, health research, universities, and at the same time it massively increases the budget to arrest and deport immigrants. And it gives a huge tax cut to the wealthy. And it makes me wonder, did the members of Congress ask the ordinary people in their districts about this bill? Because the polling shows that this bill is very unpopular. 50 to 65% of people polled said they don't think it's a good bill. So, how did it get passed, you wonder? Well, it passed because the members of Congress are mostly very wealthy. And they don't know what it's like to be poor and to have to struggle with your budget. Did they ask the single mother of four who uses food stamps to stretch her budget to feed her family? Did they ask the diabetic who relies on Medicare for his wound care? Did they ask the hospital administrator what he's going to do when he doesn't have enough money to fund his rural hospital? Did they ask the 9-year-old girl whose father might be taken away from their family any day? I don't think so. The Bible consistently calls us to listen to the needs of the poor and the disenfranchised. You shall care for the orphan and the widow. You shall open your hand to the poor and the needy. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Blessed are you who are poor. You know, the genius of the Declaration of Independence is that it says that ordinary people are important. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, all people, are created equal. That means that every person has a vote. The poorest American is equal to the richest billionaire. It means we listen to the poor as well as to the rich. I think our representatives in Congress would have done better if they had been like Naaman and listened to ordinary people to get some common sense advice. Once upon a time, there was a king who was so vain that all he wanted to do was wear fine clothes and show them to the people. And one day, two rascals came to the king, and they said that they were going to make him a magnificent pair of clothes out of cloth that they would weave, and this cloth was special because the stupid and the incompetent couldn't see it. And the king agreed and ordered up a suit of clothes. So the two rascals set about supposedly weaving this cloth on looms there in the castle, and of course there wasn't anything there. But the king's advisors and the courtiers would come down and see what they were doing. They didn't see any cloth. But they didn't want to be called stupid or incompetent, so they said, what fine cloth it is. And finally the day came, and the two rascals pretended to dress the king in their invisible cloth and see how splendid he looked. Of course, the king couldn't admit that he was actually naked because that everyone would think that he was stupid and incompetent. So the two rascals led the king through the streets, and no one dared to say anything because no one wanted to be called stupid or incompetent. And finally, a little boy spoke up and says, "The king is naked." And everyone realized that they had been duped. They weren't incompetent or stupid. And the king was indeed naked. Well, why did it take a little boy to tell the truth? Sometimes the truth comes from the mouth of babes, or from the lowliest, from the ordinary, from slave girls and servants, and you and me.